On November 12, 1942, in Richmond, California, a momentous event in the history of industrial manufacturing took place. The SS Robert E. Peary, a Liberty ship, was launched into San Francisco Bay after just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes of construction. The ship, measuring 441 feet in length and weighing 28,490 tons, stood as a testament to the incredible speed and efficiency achieved through a revolutionary approach to shipbuilding. Prior to this achievement, constructing a vessel of this size and scale on traditional shipyards would have taken anywhere between 6 to 8 months. The conventional methods that had been in place for centuries had always depended on meticulous craftsmanship, with the belief that shipbuilding was a complex, time-consuming process. However, in Richmond, a new way of thinking had turned the process upside down, and this ship's swift completion was nothing short of groundbreaking. The SS Robert E. Peary was not merely another cargo vessel. It was a symbol of an industrial revolution that would change the course of maritime construction forever. For decades, shipbuilding had been a slow, painstaking process, steeped in centuries of tradition. But this ship, built in an unimaginable time frame, would become a hallmark of a new era. The ship's quick assembly stunned observers, as it defied every expectation and shattered the norms of the shipbuilding industry. What made it even more extraordinary was the fact that the workers who had constructed it were not seasoned shipbuilders or experienced maritime craftsmen. Instead, they were individuals with little to no prior experience in shipbuilding, secretaries, farmers, housewives, and laborers who had only recently been trained in welding techniques. These were not traditional workers, but rather a new workforce that had been rapidly mobilized and trained for this specific task, reflecting the immense potential for mass production when innovative approaches were applied. The shipyard in Richmond was an unconventional space, vastly different from the long-established shipbuilding facilities across the United States. This was not a place where intricate ship plans were followed to the letter, nor where generations of shipwrights passed down their skills to the next. Instead, the Richmond yard functioned more like an automobile assembly line. Prefabricated sections of the ship were constructed simultaneously in different areas of the yard and then brought together using massive cranes. This method of parallel production, coupled with the use of electric arc welding instead of traditional riveting, dramatically accelerated the entire process. By employing assembly line techniques, where each worker focused on a specific repetitive task, production times plummeted and the labor force's efficiency skyrocketed. The SS Robert E. Peary, like the countless other Liberty ships that followed, was built using a radically different approach. Traditional shipyards, which had relied on time-honored methods passed down through generations, were quick to dismiss this new approach as a fleeting experiment. Yet, as the SS Robert E. Peary slid into the water, the entire maritime industry was forced to reconsider everything it had previously believed about shipbuilding. This ship's construction had taken less than a week, while the typical shipbuilding process on established yards would have taken months. The swift completion of this vessel symbolized a moment of profound change in industrial production. The historical significance of this achievement was not just about the speed of construction or the technological innovations that made it possible. The event marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in the way ships would be built from that point forward. The methods pioneered in Richmond would soon be adopted nationwide, and eventually globally, setting the stage for the unprecedented wartime shipbuilding efforts that would fuel the Allied forces throughout the Second World War. This remarkable achievement was a direct response to the critical need for mass production in the face of the escalating conflict. As the Axis powers gained ground in the Atlantic, the Allies' supply lines were under constant threat. Merchant ships were being sunk at a staggering rate, and the urgency to replenish the fleets was overwhelming. What had once seemed impossible, building ships in record time with minimal experience, was now a proven reality. The SS Robert E. Peary's rapid construction demonstrated that, with the right strategies, seemingly insurmountable challenges could be overcome. This was not just a ship launched into the bay. It was the launch of a new way of thinking about industrial production, one that would have far-reaching consequences in the war effort and beyond. The Richmond shipyard's success was not an isolated incident. It represented a fundamental shift in manufacturing across all industries, one that saw the rapid scaling of production to meet the demands of the war. The methods used in Richmond soon spread to other shipyards across the United States, where Liberty ships began to roll off the assembly lines at an extraordinary rate. The significance of this achievement was not lost on the maritime community, which had long regarded shipbuilding as a labor-intensive craft requiring specialized knowledge and years of training. The success of the SS Robert E. Peary revealed that even the most established industries were vulnerable to disruption, and that innovation, when applied correctly, could yield results beyond imagination. The public and the media were quick to recognize the importance of this achievement. What had been deemed an impossible feat just months before became a demonstration of what was possible when necessity met innovation. The SS Robert E. Peary's launch marked a turning point in history, a moment when a single ship, built in an impossibly short time, symbolized a radical departure from the past. This event would forever alter the course of shipbuilding, industrial production, and the war itself, making it one of the most pivotal moments in the history of modern manufacturing. Before the 1940s, shipyards in the United States were governed by centuries-old traditions of shipbuilding. These shipyards functioned more like traditional workshops, where each vessel was meticulously built over several months, with every component carefully crafted by skilled craftsmen. The construction process was highly methodical and required the expertise of experienced shipbuilders who had often inherited their trade from previous generations. It was a slow, painstaking process, as the production of ships involved intricate tasks that could not be rushed. Each ship was constructed one at a time, and workers used riveting techniques, where metal pins were heated and hammered through overlapping steel plates to join them together. This method, although reliable, was labor-intensive, time-consuming, and limited in its capacity to meet wartime demands for rapid ship production. The world had relied on these traditional methods for centuries. The shipbuilding industry had not significantly changed since the Industrial Revolution. Shipyards were typically large facilities with specialized workers handling specific tasks, but all the work had to be done in a sequential manner, with no possibility of overlapping processes. The building of a single vessel involved an enormous amount of time and resources, and the workforce required years of specialized training. The conventional wisdom within the industry was that shipbuilding was an art that could not be rushed. The same methods were used in every major shipyard across the world, and there was little room for innovation or drastic change. Shipbuilding was thought of as a process that was inherently slow and required meticulous craftsmanship to ensure quality and seaworthiness. The industry had simply assumed that this was the way things had to be done. However, by the late 1930s and early 1940s, the global political situation was changing, and the United States found itself facing the looming threat of World War II. The need for military vessels to support the war effort was becoming increasingly urgent. By this time, the traditional methods of shipbuilding were no longer sufficient to meet the unprecedented demand for ships, especially in the face of the Axis powers' aggressive naval strategies. Ships were being sunk by enemy submarines and surface raiders at an alarming rate, and the Allied nations were struggling to replace lost vessels. In particular, the British were facing critical shortages of ships to support their war efforts. The United States, though possessing a strong industrial base, was struggling to convert its manufacturing capacity quickly enough to meet the needs of the military. As a result, the ability to produce ships quickly and efficiently became a matter of national security. It was in this context of escalating urgency that Henry J. Kaiser, a man with no prior experience in shipbuilding, proposed a radical solution. Kaiser was a construction magnate with a background in building dams, highways, and other large infrastructure projects. He had no history in the maritime industry and had never even managed a shipyard before. But in the face of the war's demands, he believed that the conventional shipbuilding methods were outdated and needed to be completely overhauled. Kaiser proposed that ships be built not in the traditional manner, but using mass production techniques similar to those used in automobile manufacturing. He envisioned applying the principles of assembly line manufacturing, a method that had already revolutionized the production of cars at companies like Ford. Kaiser's concept was revolutionary in its simplicity. Rather than building ships one component at a time in a sequential manner, he proposed constructing the various parts of the ship simultaneously in different areas of the yard. These parts would then be brought together and welded into place, drastically reducing the overall construction time. The traditional method of riveting, which required skilled workers to hammer metal pins through overlapping steel plates, was replaced by electric arc welding. This technique, which had been successfully used in the construction of pipelines, was not only faster but also cheaper and required less specialized training. By using welding, which could be done by workers with just a few weeks of training, the shipbuilding process could be accelerated significantly. The idea of using an assembly line to build ships, combined with the switch to welding instead of riveting, was something that the traditional shipbuilding community viewed as almost absurd. The established shipyards and their engineers had been building ships in essentially the same way for centuries, and the thought of completely altering the process was met with skepticism and resistance. These experts believed that shipbuilding was an inherently complex task that required a certain level of craftsmanship and attention to detail. Kaiser's proposal to mass-produce ships using methods borrowed from the automotive industry seemed to undermine everything the industry stood for. The notion that ships could be assembled quickly by relatively unskilled workers, many of whom had never even seen a ship before, was dismissed as unrealistic and reckless. The idea was particularly controversial because it ran counter to the long-standing belief that ships were highly specialized, bespoke creations that required the involvement of experienced, skilled workers at every stage of construction. The established wisdom was that each ship required a highly personalized approach, with meticulous attention to every detail. By contrast, Kaiser's mass production methods seemed to suggest that ships were simply another type of product that could be built quickly and efficiently, much like a car on an assembly line. This idea not only challenged the traditional methods of shipbuilding, but also posed a threat to the entire structure of the maritime industry. Many of the industry's most respected engineers and architects were initially resistant to Kaiser's approach, dismissing it as impractical and even dangerous. Kaiser, however, was undeterred. He believed that the pressing need for ships during the war was so great that traditional methods could no longer be relied upon. The United States needed to produce ships at an unprecedented rate, and Kaiser believed that the only way to achieve this was by fundamentally changing the way ships were built. He proposed building large, prefabricated sections of the ship in parallel, instead of constructing the ship in a single sequence. Workers would specialize in specific tasks, such as welding the bulkheads, assembling the engine rooms, or attaching the decks, and these tasks would be repeated across multiple ships. This would allow workers to become highly efficient at specific tasks in a short amount of time, rather than spending years learning the full range of skills needed to build a traditional ship. Kaiser's approach was not just a technological innovation, but a complete rethinking of the entire shipbuilding process. It was an approach that required a new mindset, one that embraced industrial efficiency and mass production. The goal was not to create the most beautiful or perfectly crafted ships, but rather to build ships that were functional and could be produced in large numbers. The emphasis was on speed, efficiency, and quantity. The traditional methods, which had been refined over centuries, were no longer sufficient for the demands of wartime production. What Kaiser proposed was a complete transformation of the industry, and while his approach was radical and untested, it was also exactly what the United States needed to meet the challenges of World War II. In 1941, Henry Kaiser and his team began the construction of new shipyards in Richmond, California, designed specifically for the implementation of their innovative methods. The vision for these shipyards was to revolutionize the traditional process of shipbuilding, which had remained largely unchanged for centuries. At the core of this transformation was the shift from the painstaking, time-consuming process of riveting to the much faster and more efficient method of electric arc welding. This was not merely a minor tweak to existing practices, but a fundamental departure from the way ships had been built for generations. Welding, as proposed by Kaiser, would reduce the time required to assemble each ship significantly, allowing for faster production and less labor-intensive processes. The design of the shipyard itself reflected the new approach. Traditional shipyards typically operated with a sequential, step-by-step production process. Ships were built in a single, continuous line of work, with each section being completed before the next could begin. This method was slow and limited the overall efficiency of the shipyard. However, Kaiser's new design was built around the concept of parallel production. Instead of waiting for one section of the ship to be completed before starting the next, multiple sections of the ship were built simultaneously across different parts of the shipyard. The shipyard was laid out with separate specialized areas where workers would focus on particular components of the ship: the hull, the engine room, the deck, the bulkheads, and these parts would later be assembled together. This parallel production model was inspired by techniques already used in the automobile industry. Just as a car assembly line featured multiple stations where different components were constructed at the same time, the new shipyards operated under the same principle. Each worker at the new shipyards would specialize in a specific task, such as welding or fitting, rather than needing to be a generalist skilled in every part of shipbuilding. This specialization allowed workers to quickly become proficient in their assigned tasks, and the repetitive nature of the work made them more efficient. The traditional approach of training workers for years before they could become skilled craftsmen was replaced with a new model where workers could be trained in a matter of weeks to perform specific, repeatable tasks. This not only sped up the process, but also allowed a much larger, less experienced workforce to contribute to the shipbuilding effort. The change in workforce composition was another key factor in the success of this new approach. Instead of relying solely on experienced shipbuilders, Kaiser's team recruited workers from a wide range of backgrounds. Advertisements were placed in newspapers across the country, offering jobs that promised higher than average wages and the opportunity to work in the burgeoning wartime shipbuilding industry. As a result, the workforce in the Richmond shipyards consisted largely of individuals who had no prior experience in shipbuilding: secretaries, housewives, farmers, and laborers. These workers were quickly trained in the new techniques, learning how to weld, fit components, and assemble parts of the ship. In just a few weeks, they became proficient in their specific roles, contributing to the overall speed and efficiency of the operation. This drastic shift in workforce composition and training was one of the most significant departures from traditional shipbuilding practices. Traditionally, shipyards had relied on highly skilled workers who had spent years learning their craft. These workers had passed their knowledge down through generations, and the shipbuilding process was viewed as a specialized art. Kaiser's approach was in stark contrast to this system, as he employed a much larger, less experienced workforce and trained them in specific, narrow tasks that could be easily repeated. Despite initial skepticism from traditional shipbuilders, this method proved to be highly effective, as it allowed for the rapid construction of ships without the need for years of training or expertise. At the same time, Kaiser's new approach was met with skepticism and resistance from various sectors. Many military officials and representatives from the traditional shipbuilding industry were concerned that this shift to mass production would compromise the quality and safety of the ships being built. The idea of using a largely untrained workforce to construct ships was viewed as risky, and many feared that the ships would not meet the necessary standards of reliability and durability required for wartime service. There were also concerns that the move to electric welding, which had not been widely tested on ships, would result in weaker, more easily damaged vessels. These concerns were not limited to the military. Even some of the most respected shipbuilders of the time questioned whether such a radical departure from traditional methods was even possible. However, despite these concerns, the urgency of the war effort demanded that Kaiser's new methods be put into practice. The Allies were losing ships at an alarming rate, and there was a desperate need for replacements. The traditional shipyard simply could not produce enough vessels fast enough to keep up with the mounting losses. Kaiser's approach, though unconventional, offered a potential solution to this problem. It promised to significantly speed up the shipbuilding process, allowing for the rapid construction of ships that could replace those lost at sea. The decision to approve Kaiser's methods, despite the skepticism, was driven largely by necessity. The traditional methods of shipbuilding had proven to be too slow to meet the wartime demands, and Kaiser's new approach was seen as a viable alternative. As the shipyard in Richmond began to take shape, it became clear that this was not going to be a small-scale experiment. The scale of the operation was enormous, and it was designed to accommodate the mass production of ships. Overhead cranes, capable of lifting large sections of steel, were installed throughout the yard, and the facility was laid out to allow for the efficient transport of materials and parts. Unlike traditional shipyards, which relied on a series of fixed sequential steps to build a ship, the Richmond shipyard was designed to allow for the simultaneous construction of multiple sections of different ships. The layout of the yard was optimized for speed, with large areas dedicated to the prefabrication of parts, which were then assembled on site. This design was fundamentally different from the traditional shipyard model, and it was clear that the success of this approach would depend on the workers' ability to adapt to the new system. In the early days of the new shipyard's operation, there were certainly challenges and setbacks. The workforce was largely inexperienced, and the new methods of production had not yet been perfected. However, as workers became more familiar with the tasks they were assigned, the efficiency of the shipyard began to improve. The speed at which ships were constructed began to increase, and soon it became clear that Kaiser's approach was working. The first ships that came out of the Richmond shipyard were completed in a fraction of the time it would have taken in a traditional shipyard, and they met the necessary standards of quality and seaworthiness. Despite the initial doubts, the new approach to shipbuilding had proven to be not only feasible, but highly effective. The Richmond shipyard was able to produce ships at a pace that no one had thought possible, and its success would become the model for shipyards across the country. Although there were still critics who questioned the long-term sustainability of this mass production model, the early results were undeniable. The speed and efficiency of the new methods allowed the United States to begin replacing the ships lost during the war at an unprecedented rate, providing vital support to the Allied forces and changing the course of the conflict. Despite the initial skepticism that surrounded Henry Kaiser's revolutionary shipbuilding methods, the first results from the Richmond shipyards exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. Early on, many experts in the maritime industry, as well as military officials, questioned the practicality of Kaiser's approach. They were deeply skeptical about the idea of mass-producing ships with an inexperienced workforce using techniques like welding, which had not been extensively tested in shipbuilding. The traditional shipbuilding community, which relied on decades of craftsmanship and detailed sequential work, found it hard to believe that this new assembly line approach would yield vessels capable of withstanding the rigors of wartime operations. However, as the first ships began to take shape at the Richmond shipyard, the skeptics had no choice but to acknowledge the impressive results. The most immediate and striking improvement was the speed of construction. Prior to Kaiser's methods, the average time to build a Liberty ship was around 230 days. Under Kaiser's system, that number began to shrink rapidly. By the spring of 1942, the average time to complete a ship had been reduced to just 70 days. This was a significant achievement and one that even the most critical engineers could not ignore. The reduction in construction time was not just a minor efficiency gain. It represented a fundamental shift in how shipbuilding could be approached. The traditional shipyards, which had taken months to complete a single vessel, were now seeing the speed of production that had previously been considered impossible. The dramatic improvements in speed were just the beginning. As workers became more experienced with the new methods, the shipyards began to surpass even their own expectations. The speed at which ships were being built continued to increase, and the success of Kaiser's methods began to draw attention from around the country. The rapid pace of production not only demonstrated that the new system could work, but also highlighted the efficiency of the assembly line approach that Kaiser had introduced. Even those who had initially dismissed the idea of mass-producing ships started to take notice. They began to recognize that the combination of prefabrication, parallel production, and specialized training for workers was yielding results that were unmatched by traditional shipyards. In September 1942, an even more impressive milestone was reached at one of Kaiser's shipyards in Oregon. The team there successfully completed a Liberty ship in just 10 days. This achievement stunned the shipbuilding industry. Traditional shipyards had been used to building ships over the course of many months, so the idea of constructing an entire vessel in such a short period seemed almost unfathomable. Yet the ship was completed on time, and it was a fully operational vessel, ready for service. The success of this 10-day ship was a powerful demonstration of the potential of Kaiser's approach, and sent a clear message to the skeptics that his methods were not only feasible, but capable of producing ships that could compete with the best that traditional shipyards had to offer. However, the most remarkable demonstration of Kaiser's approach came when the team at Richmond set their sights on an even more ambitious goal: building a ship in just 5 days. This was a feat that seemed to many utterly impossible. How could a ship be built so quickly, especially when traditional shipyards had required several months to complete a single vessel? But Kaiser and his team, undeterred by the doubts of others, decided to push forward with the challenge. In early November 1942, they began the construction of the SS Robert E. Peary, a Liberty ship that would set a new record for the fastest construction time ever achieved. The workers at the Richmond shipyard, many of whom had little to no experience in shipbuilding just a few months earlier, began working around the clock in carefully coordinated shifts to assemble the ship. Construction began at midnight on Sunday, and by Thursday afternoon, just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes later, the SS Robert E. Peary was sliding into San Francisco Bay. The completion time of 4 days and 15 hours was a remarkable achievement, one that defied every expectation and established a new benchmark for shipbuilding speed. The SS Robert E. Peary was not a partial or incomplete vessel. It was fully operational and ready for service. This ship was built in less than 5 days, while traditional shipyards would have needed months to complete something of similar size and complexity. The successful completion of the SS Robert E. Peary in such a short time was more than just a record-breaking achievement. It was a definitive demonstration of the power of Kaiser's mass production methods. The ship was built using the same processes and techniques that had been used for the 10-day ship and the 70-day ships before it. It showed that these methods were not just efficient in theory, but could also be replicated on a large scale. The SS Robert E. Peary's completion in just over 4 days proved that speed, efficiency, and quality could coexist, something that had been considered impossible in traditional shipbuilding. The impact of this achievement was immediate and profound. The traditional shipbuilding industry, which had long relied on methods that had been developed over centuries, had no choice but to take note. The once skeptical engineers and shipbuilders began to recognize the incredible efficiency of Kaiser's methods. What had initially been viewed as an experiment or a pipe dream had now been proven to be not only possible but highly effective. The shipbuilding industry would never be the same again. The success of the SS Robert E. Peary also had a psychological impact. It demonstrated to the workers, the military, and the public that massive industrial achievements could be accomplished in a fraction of the time that had previously been thought possible. For the workers at the shipyards, it was a validation of their skills and efforts. They had built something that was not only functional but groundbreaking. For the military, it meant that ships could be produced in the quantities needed to support the war effort. And for the public, it was a symbol of American ingenuity and determination in the face of adversity. In the months that followed, Kaiser's methods continued to evolve, and the production of Liberty ships ramped up even further. The speed of construction continued to decrease, and the number of ships being built soared. By the end of 1942, Kaiser's shipyards were producing ships at a rate that was unthinkable just a year earlier. The success of the SS Robert E. Peary and the subsequent records set by other shipyards proved that Kaiser's approach was not just a temporary solution, but a lasting change that would transform the way ships were built for generations to come. The results of the first few years of Kaiser's shipbuilding efforts demonstrated that even the most entrenched industries could be revolutionized through innovation and determination. The skeptics who had once doubted Kaiser's methods were now forced to acknowledge the extraordinary results. Kaiser's approach was not only breaking records, but also changing the future of shipbuilding, proving that when necessity meets innovation, even the most entrenched conventions can be overcome. The launch of the SS Robert E. Peary in November 1942 marked an unprecedented achievement in shipbuilding history. From the moment construction began on the night of Sunday, November 8th, until the ship slid into the San Francisco Bay at 3:30 p.m. on Thursday, November 12th, only 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes had passed. This was not just a symbolic event. It was a tangible demonstration of the potential of mass production techniques applied to shipbuilding. No other shipyard in the world had come close to achieving such a feat. Traditional shipbuilding, which had always been a slow, methodical process, had now been upended by a new approach that drastically reduced the time needed to build a fully functional ship. The SS Robert E. Peary was not only built in record time, but was also fully operational and ready for service as soon as it was launched. This ship, which was constructed in a fraction of the time it would have taken at any traditional shipyard, was capable of performing its intended duties immediately. It was a testament to the efficacy of the assembly line principles that Henry Kaiser and his team had introduced to the maritime industry. These principles, which involved building parts of the ship in parallel and using electric welding instead of the traditional riveting method, allowed the ship to be completed quickly without sacrificing its functionality or reliability. This achievement, where a fully functional ship was ready for service in just a few days, was an extraordinary milestone for the industry. The success of the SS Robert E. Peary's rapid construction set a new benchmark for the shipbuilding industry. It not only demonstrated that it was possible to build ships much faster than previously thought, but also proved that mass production techniques could be successfully applied to a field that had long been governed by traditional methods. The idea that a ship could be constructed in just a few days, using a largely untrained workforce and a radically different process, was revolutionary. The SS Robert E. Peary became a symbol of what was possible when necessity and innovation came together, and it sent shockwaves through the entire shipbuilding industry. The achievement of constructing a ship in less than 5 days did not remain an isolated incident. It had a profound and lasting impact on the industry as a whole. As news of the success of the SS Robert E. Peary spread, other shipyards in the United States began to take notice and adopt Kaiser's methods. The concept of mass production, which had already revolutionized industries like automobile manufacturing, was now making its way into the shipbuilding world. Kaiser's approach was a direct challenge to the long-standing tradition of meticulous craftsmanship and sequential construction. However, the tangible results, the rapid completion of fully functional ships, forced even the most skeptical shipbuilders to reconsider their practices. As other shipyards began to adopt Kaiser's methods, the pace of ship production across the United States began to increase dramatically. The Richmond Shipyard, which had been the birthplace of these new techniques, set the standard, and soon other facilities followed suit. By the end of 1942, production at Kaiser's shipyards had surpassed all expectations. What had once been thought of as an unattainable goal, the rapid production of ships, became a reality. Ships that had traditionally taken months to complete were now being built in weeks, and eventually in a matter of days. The increased output was a direct result of the widespread adoption of Kaiser's methods, which emphasized parallel production, prefabrication, and specialized labor. The scale of the changes brought about by this new approach was immense. Shipyards that had been operating at a slower pace were now able to produce ships at a significantly faster rate. The ability to produce Liberty ships in a fraction of the time it had previously taken gave the United States a tremendous advantage in the ongoing war effort. By 1943, Kaiser's shipyards were launching ships at a rate that far exceeded what had been possible under traditional methods. The number of ships being produced in a single year was staggering, and it was clear that this new approach to shipbuilding had the potential to reshape the entire industry. The influence of this new method extended beyond just the United States. As the success of Kaiser's shipyards became widely known, other nations began to take notice and adopted similar techniques. The innovations in shipbuilding that Kaiser had introduced were not just limited to wartime production. They laid the groundwork for future developments in the maritime industry, and many of the methods pioneered at Kaiser's shipyards became standard practice worldwide. The shift from traditional handcrafted shipbuilding to mass production and assembly line techniques had a lasting impact on how ships were built across the globe. As Kaiser's methods spread, they contributed to a significant reduction in the cost of shipbuilding. The time saved by using parallel production and welding instead of riveting meant that ships could be built more efficiently and at a lower cost. The United States was able to build more ships with the same amount of resources, which proved crucial in sustaining the war effort. The sheer scale of the production made it impossible for the Axis powers to keep up with the rapid pace of shipbuilding in the United States, and this contributed significantly to the Allied victory. The success of Kaiser's shipyards also had a ripple effect on other industries. The principles of mass production and assembly line work that had been applied to shipbuilding were soon adopted by other sectors of the economy. The techniques developed in Kaiser's shipyards became a model for industrial production in general, not just in the maritime industry. These methods demonstrated that with the right organization and approach, industrial output could be increased exponentially. The lessons learned from the rapid production of Liberty ships would go on to influence manufacturing practices in numerous industries, from automobiles to consumer goods. The achievements of the Kaiser shipyards did not just change shipbuilding, they changed the way industries approached production in general. The success of these shipyards proved that it was possible to achieve high levels of efficiency and output through innovation and the application of mass production techniques. By the end of the war, Kaiser's methods had not only reshaped the shipbuilding industry, but had also demonstrated the transformative potential of industrial innovation. The production of ships at such a rapid pace had been a critical factor in the Allied victory in World War II, and it had established a new standard for industrial production in the years to come. In conclusion, the achievements of the SS Robert E. Peary and the subsequent success of the Kaiser shipyards set new records for shipbuilding speed and efficiency. The adoption of mass production techniques revolutionized the industry, increasing the rate of ship production and reducing costs. This shift in the way ships were built had a lasting impact on the maritime industry, as well as on manufacturing in general. The influence of these innovations extended far beyond the war years and laid the foundation for future developments in industrial production. The legacy of Kaiser's shipyards remains evident in modern manufacturing processes, which continue to draw on the principles of mass production and efficiency that were pioneered in Richmond, California during World War II. Henry Kaiser's revolutionary approach to shipbuilding not only transformed the industry, but also had a profound social impact, particularly in the realm of workforce composition. Before Kaiser's shipyards, shipbuilding was considered a male-dominated industry where highly skilled workers with years of experience were responsible for constructing vessels. Traditionally, shipbuilding had been passed down through generations of craftsmen, and it was widely believed that only a specific class of workers could master the required skills. This long-standing convention was upended by Kaiser, who opened his shipyards to a diverse workforce, including women and minorities, in a move that was groundbreaking for the 1940s. At the height of the war effort, Kaiser's shipyards employed thousands of women, many of whom had no previous experience in industrial work. These women took on roles that had traditionally been reserved for men, such as welding, operating cranes, and assembling heavy machinery. Their involvement in the shipbuilding process was not only a necessity due to the shortage of male workers, but also a radical shift in the labor market. Women were quickly trained in specific, repeatable tasks and became essential to the rapid production of Liberty ships. In fact, many women became skilled welders, an occupation that had long been dominated by men. This shift allowed women to prove their capabilities in roles that had been considered outside their reach just a few years earlier. The integration of women into the workforce was also a social breakthrough. The war effort created an urgent need for labor, and the influx of women into industrial work was both a practical response to the manpower shortage and a challenge to the rigid gender norms of the time. For the first time, women were not just confined to traditional roles as homemakers or office workers, but were engaged in physically demanding and highly skilled tasks. This opportunity had long-term implications, as it provided many women with new economic independence and opened doors for their future participation in industries that had previously excluded them. In addition to women, minorities were also given unprecedented opportunities to work in Kaiser's shipyards. African Americans, in particular, were employed in large numbers and often in skilled positions, such as welding, fitting, crane operation, and even in supervisory roles. This marked a significant departure from the discrimination that had been prevalent in many industries at the time. The shipyards became an example of integrated workplaces, where individuals were hired based on their ability to perform the work, rather than their race or gender. For African American workers, this opportunity represented a significant break from the segregationist policies that had dominated the American labor force. The hiring of women and minorities not only addressed the immediate labor shortages, but also had lasting effects on American society. By bringing these groups into the workforce, Kaiser's shipyards helped to challenge the entrenched racial and gender hierarchies that had shaped the American workforce for decades. Women who worked in these shipyards gained valuable industrial skills that would serve them well long after the war ended. For many, the wartime experience led to long-term careers in manufacturing and other traditionally male-dominated sectors. Similarly, African Americans and other minorities gained access to higher-paying jobs and were able to improve their economic standing in a way that had been difficult, if not impossible, before the war. Kaiser's approach to workforce diversity had a ripple effect that extended beyond the shipyards. As the war came to an end, many of the women and minorities who had gained experience in the shipyards sought to retain their newly acquired positions in the workforce. The social changes initiated by Kaiser's policies helped to pave the way for future movements aimed at improving gender and racial equality in the workplace. The wartime employment of women and minorities demonstrated that these groups were capable of performing the same work as their male counterparts, and that industrial labor was not restricted to any one gender or race. The experience in Kaiser's shipyards was a critical moment in the larger story of civil rights and women's rights in America. However, the impact of Kaiser's shipyards was not limited to the labor force alone. The shipyards themselves became an important focal point for changing societal attitudes. The work was demanding and grueling, but the workers at Kaiser's shipyards were proud of their contributions. For many, the experience of building ships for the war effort was an empowering one. Workers were not just part of a factory assembly line. They were contributing to the larger national cause. This sense of purpose and pride in their work created a strong sense of community among the workforce, and many workers, especially women, developed a lasting bond with the industry and with each other. At the same time, the influx of unskilled workers into the shipbuilding industry raised concerns within the traditional maritime community. Veteran shipbuilders, who had spent their careers mastering the craft, were initially appalled by the rapid changes being implemented at Kaiser's shipyards. They believed that a workforce with little to no formal training could never build ships to the high standards required for wartime use. Some were also concerned that the quality of the ships being produced might suffer as a result of the rushed mass production methods. These concerns were compounded by the fact that many of the workers were women and minorities, groups that had not traditionally been involved in shipbuilding. The idea that a largely untrained workforce could produce ships as efficiently and effectively as skilled craftsmen was met with disbelief by many in the industry. Despite these initial fears, the results were undeniable. The ships produced at Kaiser's shipyards met the rigorous demands of wartime service, and the efficiency with which they were produced was unparalleled. As the ships rolled off the assembly lines, even the most skeptical traditionalists had to admit that the new methods were working. Within a matter of months, the shipyards were operating at full capacity, producing ships at a rate that was unmatched anywhere else in the world. Traditional shipyards, seeing the success of Kaiser's approach, began to adopt similar methods. This shift was not only a testament to the effectiveness of Kaiser's system, but also to the adaptability of the American workforce, which had risen to the challenge and proven itself capable of learning new skills quickly and efficiently. In conclusion, the social impact of Kaiser's shipbuilding program was immense. It not only transformed the shipbuilding industry, but also had lasting consequences for gender and racial equality in the workplace. By opening up industrial jobs to women and minorities, Kaiser's shipyards played a key role in breaking down the barriers that had traditionally limited these groups' access to well-paying, skilled labor. The success of this approach helped to reshape societal views on the role of women and minorities in the workforce, setting the stage for future movements aimed at achieving greater equality in the workplace and in society as a whole. The revolution Henry Kaiser introduced in shipbuilding was so profound that it not only transformed the American maritime industry, but also had a far-reaching impact on the entire global manufacturing landscape. Before Kaiser's innovations, shipbuilding had remained largely unchanged for centuries. The traditional methods, built upon manual labor, skilled craftsmanship, and sequential construction, had been seen as the only way to produce ships. Kaiser's approach, which emphasized mass production, parallel construction, and the use of electric welding, defied these long-standing conventions. The success of his methods in the production of Liberty ships during World War II demonstrated that industrial-scale efficiency and speed could be achieved in shipbuilding, a process previously believed to be too complex for such techniques. The methods Kaiser introduced quickly gained acceptance beyond the confines of American shipyards. As his approach to shipbuilding gained prominence, it spread across the globe. Shipyards in other nations took notice and began to adapt similar practices to their own needs. The efficiency of Kaiser's methods was simply too compelling to ignore. These new techniques allowed shipbuilders worldwide to cut construction times dramatically and reduce costs, revolutionizing the shipbuilding industry. In the decades following the war, many countries adopted the principles of mass production and parallel assembly lines pioneered by Kaiser, making them standard practices in shipyards all over the world. As a result, Kaiser's influence helped to raise the level of global industrial production, reducing the time and cost required to build ships and increasing overall output. The long-term impact of Kaiser's innovations extended beyond shipbuilding. The principles of mass production, which had been refined and applied to the construction of Liberty ships, found applications in other industries as well. After the war, many of the practices Kaiser had pioneered in shipbuilding were adapted for use in sectors such as automotive manufacturing, aircraft production, and even consumer goods. The approach of using specialized workers, prefabricated parts, and parallel production became a cornerstone of modern industrial manufacturing. The success of the Liberty ship program demonstrated that mass production could be applied to industries previously resistant to such methods. As industries began to adopt these principles, they saw significant increases in efficiency, which in turn contributed to the overall growth of the global economy in the post-war era. Furthermore, the lessons learned from Kaiser's shipyards set the stage for the future of industrial development. By demonstrating that complex manufacturing could be achieved quickly and efficiently, Kaiser's shipyards became a model for other industries striving to meet the demands of an ever-changing world. The willingness to embrace innovation, to challenge established norms, and to develop new techniques for mass production became a hallmark of the post-war industrial boom. Industries around the world recognized that traditional methods of production were often too slow and too costly to keep up with the needs of a rapidly industrializing world. Kaiser's methods were a powerful reminder that the status quo could be disrupted and that innovation was essential to meet the challenges of a new era. Kaiser's success also underscored the importance of adapting to changing circumstances. The methods that he introduced were born out of necessity during the Second World War, as the need for ships was urgent and critical. Yet the same principles that had helped to build thousands of ships for the war effort proved just as effective in peacetime manufacturing. This ability to pivot and apply proven techniques to new challenges was one of the key factors that allowed his innovations to have such a lasting impact. The flexibility of Kaiser's approach, and his belief that traditional methods and limitations could be overcome with the right kind of innovation, set a precedent for future generations of industrial leaders. The legacy of Kaiser's shipyards is also seen in the ongoing developments in manufacturing technology. The principles of prefabrication, standardized parts, and specialized labor that were applied to shipbuilding were later incorporated into many other industries. Today, many of the techniques pioneered by Kaiser continue to be used in factories across various sectors. From the automotive industry to electronics manufacturing, the use of assembly lines, modular production, and the division of labor into specialized tasks are now the norm. Kaiser's approach to shipbuilding was a critical turning point in the development of modern industrial practices, and the methods he introduced became foundational for the growth of manufacturing as a global industry. Moreover, the impact of Kaiser's methods was not limited to production alone. The speed and efficiency achieved in shipyards had profound social implications. The wartime shipbuilding efforts created thousands of jobs and empowered a diverse workforce, including women and minorities, who had previously been excluded from many sectors of industry. By opening up shipbuilding to a broader, more diverse workforce, Kaiser's shipyards helped to challenge long-standing barriers to employment and open the door to greater opportunities for underrepresented groups. The success of these workers in building ships quickly and efficiently demonstrated that the American workforce, when given the right training and opportunities, could rise to any challenge. This shift in labor dynamics had a lasting impact on the broader social landscape, contributing to the post-war expansion of women's rights and the civil rights movement in the United States. Kaiser's story is a powerful reminder that innovation often comes in times of necessity. What had seemed impossible in 1940, the mass production of ships in a matter of days, became a model for the Industrial Revolution that followed. The methods he introduced were not just temporary fixes for wartime production, but long-lasting changes that would influence manufacturing practices for decades. Kaiser proved that when industries are willing to rethink old methods and embrace new ways of thinking, incredible results are possible. The success of the Liberty Ship program and the subsequent adoption of Kaiser's techniques in other sectors marked the beginning of a new era in industrial production, one that would continue to shape the global economy well into the 20th century and beyond. The legacy of Kaiser's innovation is not confined to the realm of shipbuilding or even manufacturing. His success story demonstrates the power of industrial ingenuity to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles and create lasting change. The methods he introduced became the foundation of the post-war economic boom, helping to establish the United States as an industrial superpower and laying the groundwork for the global economy as we know it today. Kaiser's impact on manufacturing is still felt across industries worldwide, and his story serves as a powerful example of what can be accomplished when tradition is challenged and new ideas are embraced with determination and vision.